Hello. Thank you for everyone for joining us today, and welcome to the community project and our feedback session with Nguyen Tran. Biofeedback and Art Placement Gallery, along with Levi and Melody, through the community project, would like to thank SaskArts for the funding and support of our project. My name is Emily, and this is Lauren and Kelsey, and together we make up the Biofeedback Collective. We reside and practice on Treaty 6 territory here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. As a collective, we are focused on creating relational and feedback-based programming for underrepresented and emerging artists. We explore how we relate to one another, our bodies, the places in which we inhabit, and how our own unique histories and ancestries come together. Today, we wish to acknowledge the land on which we meet, Treaty 6 territory, home to numerous First Nations, including the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, and Métis Nation. Biofeedback recognizes the current and long history of colonialism in Canada and our own positionality in different places and spaces within this context. As non-Indigenous people, we are committed to learning and holding space for the personal testimonies of those who have, are, and will share their stories and knowledge with us. We hope to explore both the vibrant successes alongside the difficult histories of Indigenous and settler people and lands. And together, we hope to uphold these values, histories, and testimonies within our practice and our everyday interactions. We would like to express gratitude for everyone for coming today and attending and engaging with the community project.
So before we get into the feedback session, we just wanted to welcome everybody to the community project, and for anybody who's new here, to kind of explain a little bit about what it is. So the project was intended to strengthen and support the community of artists and makers here in Saskatoon. And so it's kind of supporting everybody through a series of relational and experimental programs. So today we're here for a feedback session, and this is an experimental gathering led by an artist, and they're meant to be more fluid. So these aren't necessarily like an artist talk, but they're going to encompass different, aspects depending on who the person is. And we do want to encourage more dialogue between the participants and our artist. So today, Nguyen has come up with 3 prompts. The first one is, what are the special ingredients? As a creative person and maker, what has led you to become who you are today, and who creates what you do, and one who offers their knowledge? The second one is mortality, inevitable and transient, a gate that all living beings must cross, and for those that watch on, this is a reminder the things that matter most will cease. But it is also the hand that lifts, the voice that tells us we are resilient, that living matters. And then the last one is memories as a Polaroid photo. Are they as honest as they seem, or are they only a fraction?
Perfect. So now we would like to welcome our feedback artist, Nguyen Tran. Biofeedback has been working collaboratively with Nguyen for several years on many different projects. We are very excited for this feedback session and to have had the privilege to collaborate with Nguyen and to get the opportunity to learn from him, his interests, and his practice. Nguyen's physical journey has taken him from Saigon to Saskatoon. His artistic journey involves and joins 2 main impulses. He has a strong urge to create physical works of art. He is intrigued by the technical skills of the old masters of European figurative paintings tradition, and equally impressive skills of the generations of artisans who have created useful objects such as books and clothing. These objects are, to him, no less valuable or beautiful for being useful than the paintings are. He also has a strong need to represent figures whose attributes come to him like characters in a story unfolding within him. Each painting's subject matter comes to him as unique to the moment of creation. But the images, when viewed together and in retrospect, add to the story which his artistic life is telling. Each work presents its unique artistic challenges to him as he strives to grow technically as an artist. And each work also contributes a new character or characters to the story in which he can only discover as he tells it through his art. This story is unfolding slowly, its meaning growing clearer, and more pieces are added to the puzzle. But he is not expecting the journey to provide final answers. Please join me in welcoming Nguyen.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for the introduction, for everyone to be here. This first feedback session, I was gonna treat it like an artist talk because I thought, why not? I would like to unpack a lot of things and to see, what might comes out of, what might be like the feedback, what might be like the conversation about those ideas is gonna be. It's probably like the scope of it probably didn't hit me until like 2 hours ago. I was kind of putting clothes on, like, whoa, you're gonna like talk in front of like a bunch of people. But it won't be like anything too, like over the top or too like, academic. Nothing too, like, it won't be like up there. It will just kind of be like a more casual conversation that I would like to happen. There are 4 topics. There are 4 topics. Each of them are kind of geared towards certain thing, but they kind of like, they work together. Like they'll influence one another, they'll overlap. So we'll start shortly here. Everything I make, I like to name them, even though sometimes I don't. I call this presentation manifesto. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Nguyen. That's how it's spelled. Saying that now is kind of weird too, because saying Nguyen Tran for so long, you kind of associate with somebody now. Art came to me maybe just when I started university, taking classes, and I kind of start exploring in the more conceptual work, the more refined art making in terms of like working with materials and such. Because before university, being back home, most of my experience in making art was more or less kind of like crafting things. So, you make like friendship bracelet, you make like little maquette out of like cardboard, like cereal boxes. Like I used to make like little like figurines out of them. Coming to Saskatoon and starting art school has been an interesting journey. I never thought that I would, follow through wholeheartedly, but I think I'm at a point where I think to myself, you should definitely like pursue this, to the best of your extent. I graduated in 2019 with a BFA. I focus on, I dabble in a lot of different mediums. So I did oil painting, I can do watercolor, some oil pastel drawing, I do printmaking, I do like a little bit of like sculpturing here and there. Other than that, a lot of my interest falls on fashion and a lot of artisanal products, like making things. So a lot of on the art side, it falls on conceptual art. So a lot of the images will be more or less like realism, portraiture, and figurative works, but the idea behind them falls on conceptual work. So lots more hinting on, lots of idea hintings on, like for example, maybe like relationship between myself and the community around me, or social issues, or on a larger scope, maybe like sexuality of who I am in relation to like the society now, like how it perceive it, and historically how it evolve over time. I made lots of things. When it comes to books, the first experience of making books were this little album, like an album book. It's quite small. I made it for my cousin. But from that, after doing like printmaking classes, like every year I ended up with like a stack of paper. So I was like, well, why not just make like a tiny book out of them? So those little things started, manifesting. So I started making like tiny books just for myself, just kind of doing like little doodling in them. And over time, they kind of progress. I kind of developed into actual like watercolor journals or like drawing journals. And I would make them out of like higher artist grade paper. So a lot like for the example, these two, they're artist watercolor paper. So they're quite durable and they absorb water really nice. I made them into like a hardbound journal because a lot of the formats that I work in the art supply store, so a lot of the format that we sell, we don't have like hard journal. I thought this is just like a nice, like a nice book that you want to make, like more refined works in, and then it just like you just keep it to yourself. It could be like great, presents for anyone who does, who dabble into art, who like really appreciate making art. With making books, I came across paper marbling, and this is like another thing when you kind of like come across something and you're doing a deep dive. This is what came out of them. So you guys, I hope you saw some of the pieces of paper or the marble paper just out there. They're made with cotton rag paper, which is made out of cotton. They're very durable. They don't buckle. So like when they absorb water, they'll just keep their shape. They'll stay flat. And all the inks are they'll be like pigmented acrylic ink. So they won't fade. Like the color will like stay like that like for a really long time. The idea was to make these like higher artist product. Like I've seen how people make marble paper just out of like a crafty project like with shaving foam. You can make them really easily, but I looked at the way that it was made. I thought I could totally do this. It's the traditional technique came from, it's called Ebru. It's a traditional Turkish technique of water marbling for paper. They started in the 14th century, but there was quite, they don't know exactly when that happened. They sort of get caught up in Japanese traditional shuminigashi technique as well. This is where Japanese maker, they use like black ink on water to make like certain pattern for paper, the same way Turkish people made their Ebru paper. And the journey for Ebru paper, for marble paper, they actually made them to sell to other countries in Europe. But because the taxes on them was so high that they used those paper to wrap certain things and import them. So they totally avoided the tax on those paper. And then when those like gift wraps things come into, say, England, that's where one of the few places that these items went to. They'll reuse those paper to make as book like end cover for books. So a lot of older, like very old, like books, manuscript, they have like end paper with marble pattern on them. Like a lot of them, the university have like a huge collection of them. They're quite brittle, but like the colored are not as vibrant, but you can tell that they use, they use like more like different pigments than what we have now. But those paper like last to this day, because they just stay in books, but they do like held up their shape very nicely. So that's one of like the sentiment behind them is that I would like to make like these paper that I want to use for myself or potentially for other people, as like part of making those books. Or you can also use them for just like collages as well, so you can use them on other like artworks that you want. There was a few projects for printmaking that I juxtaposed them with images I made on paper as well, using marble paper. And one of the project we did for Wabi Sabi, 2018, we got this idea to make like a few installation based on the same idea. You create a grid and you kind of use your own material to make just like an installation. So I decided to use like all the marble paper I made so far, and I kind of like make them into like a grid pattern. And these are a few like close-up of the ones I made. These two are cool. So the first two, when there's a lot of different techniques to make these patterns. Most often, we have these things called, they look like a comb, but it's just like a stick with like a bunch of needles on it. And those needles, when you apply the ink on the water, you kind of run the comb through, and they'll just create these like wavy patterns. And then there's a lot of different techniques where you can like create like different pattern if you go the other way, or if you kind of like swirl them down this way. The one on the right, the waves, that's actually from a technique when you apply the paper down onto the water. You kind of like wiggle the paper as you lay them down, and then when the result are just like these multiple waves, like you kind of like push and pull the pattern into the paper. The water that we use for marbling, it has to have like a viscosity so that it's thick enough that the pigment don't sink. Traditionally, people use a gum. There's a name for it. People use like a gum. Oh, sorry, I didn't put it in here. There's a gum from a tree, and then when you extract it and you just boil it makes the water thicker. More in the modern day, we use carrageen, which is also a product from seaweed. So what they do, they boil seaweed, and then they'll get this viscous water, and then they'll just dehydrate it, and then all you left is like powder, and then you rehydrate the powder, and then the water will be like thick enough that you can use for marble paper to marbling, so the ink will like float on them. And the carrageen powder, or like the carrageen gelatin, are products that are used in ice cream, like to make like food like gel up. Like not a whole lot of amount is in them, but you can tell like there is like a trace of little carrageen gelatin in like food products. These two, they're made after I have done the first pattern. So every time when you do a pattern, you're left with some residue. Usually you can clean them up, but what I did was I kind of draw them back in, and then I kept going. Results were, there's just these, they're all broken up patterns. So they all get mixed in so much that it's really hard to kind of create a pattern that you want anymore. Like every time you clean them, you kind of reset, and that's how you get like a more crisp, even wave pattern. If you don't clean them, usually they'll get really messy, and this is what came out of them. And I thought, I actually like the way that they look more natural. They kind of have like a more like organic, like shape and pattern and movement into them. And these one, I have used them on other projects, so I don't think I have like these particular ones anymore. Most of them are just like the newer, like the nicer, like pattern ones that you guys saw out there. There's a few books on this technique alone, and they talks about, like, a lot of the textbook do have information on like how these items were kind of import into like different countries. They have information on like the product that they use in making these. This is an image from the book, and it just show you like the workshop. So you see, starting from the pigment making, this is the color. They just grind it down. There's these two. These are the people who does the coloring. Well, they all do the same thing. But this one right here is when they apply the color. If you can see here, it's like really fine. There's like a comb. But that lady, she's holding like a comb. And then there's like little comb tooth on it. And then they'll just dry them. And then it gets shipped out. This is like a way for them to, this is like a little contraption for them to, it's like a drying rack that they make. And for circling back to the books, I had this idea for a class. It's the class called Book as Object. And for the final product, I decided to make books for graduating BFA of that year. And the idea was, I've done, so as like up until that point, I've done like a few shows. And every time I see people getting ready for this show, they'll have like a guest book, right? But when it comes to the guest book, this is my personal reference. When I sign a guest book and I see it's like a book you bought from maybe Indigo or like the dollar store, I'm like, it should be like more than this. Like, people have seen your work, people have seen who you are, like left something that kind of put like the last impression on them. So this is where it came out of. I thought the book should reflect a part of who you, like, of your art in a way, or like a part of who you are as an artist. So I thought, what if I just take people's art, chop them up, and put them back up into a book? And I would do so based on the way, how, because when you're in class, you kind of know your classmate and how they work. So I kind of noticed like, oh yeah, like she probably like this one this way. So I'll make them a certain way. So I'll have like different formats for each person. So there's one where you see out over there with kind of like a translucent material. That one is for Unina, and she's a little bit particular in when she print. So I thought maybe like a Japanese stitch bind, where you can flip through them easily and simple, like very, just like a very linear type of book would be like the best suited for her. There's one where it looks like a fan. That one opens up into a circle, and you can actually like join the bottom, and you can hang it up like a circle like this. That one is for Caroline, and during her exhibition, she had a piece on a circle paper, and that's where it's from. So like each of those books have like a little bit of the artist, like a little bit of their touch, and then it also, it came from me, because it's just like a filter version of how I see their art, but then I make those things for them. And when you use them for as a signing guest book, what you have, what I've seen that people interact with, are they're interacting with the art themselves, because those might be like some of the work that were didn't make the cut, and then we just drop it down and make it into something that like the process of getting to that point, getting to the art themselves, getting to the exhibition. And I think that it's like a little bit more sentimental to give your viewer, other than just like a blank book that people can sign. Because when you sign, because like for my, I should have brought it. For my show, I made this huge pink book, and all the pages are all my prints, and all kind of like all the experimental like thing that I made throughout the school year, and then I can just put them in the book, and they're all like jagged, they're all like crooked and all that things. So it's kind of like an amalgamation of like thing that I gather, and then I kind of like share it with other people. It came from this idea where my mom told me, when my mom like told me of kind of like living here and then working, studying and doing things, volunteering. She said it's sort of like you go out into the forest with an empty basket, and then you kind of like collect things, and at the end you show people your basket, and then they'll look into the basket, and then they'll see like, oh yeah, you have this thing, it's cool, you have this thing, it's cool, okay, maybe like you have the qualification for like doing these things and things, this and that. So it's sort of kind of like that. It's sort of like you present more, you present like more of what you have, other than just the art themselves, and it's sort of like it's like a very sentimental little thing that people can interact with it. Because most of the time when you go to art exhibition, you look at art, right? You don't really interact with them. So the final thing when people leave is something that they can like put their marks on, and that's sort of like it's like a relation between the artist and the viewer. So it's sort of like that. It's like sometimes I make the things and it should serve like a certain purpose. Much alike to like making a belt, or like I make like these gloves. Like I figure out how to make a glove, so I made this pair of gloves. So it's sort of like the thing that I usually make should serve like a certain purpose. And it for the feedback session, when we were kind of like putting it together, so I thought to myself, creative people, or artists alike, and creative people share the same common characteristic of wanting to create things. So why do you make those things? Like what drives you to make those things? Like why do you do it anyway? Why do I make a book when I can just buy one at the store? Maybe you don't find something that you want. Maybe you just want to make them. Or maybe when you make something, you just know that there's part of you that's there. You kind of know what the process is like. So you kind of have like a trust in the product themselves. And when they do break down or anything bad happen, you know how to fix it. Because there are people who consume things, right? There are people who, when they say like, oh, I'm not creative, I'm like, interesting. I don't think that's true. But sometimes sometimes it's true. Some people don't make things and they just consume, but it's not their fault. Like obviously it's not saying that, you should make something. But I think like deep down, like the very core of artists and artisan people is that you just have the urge to make something. And that was the first prompt. So for the structure of the feedback, does anyone have any question? Does anyone have anything to share? It's sort of like what I kind of build it on. I'll just go through like a certain stuff, and then if you have like an idea, you can like tell me, or kind of like question if you have them. And if you don't think of something today, you can kind of take it home and kind of think about it, and you can submit something back to the biofeedback. For like an idea that you had, or like something that you kind of think of after the feedback. You could also kind of take on doing something that you haven't thought about doing, making something you haven't thought about making. So whatever goes. And that's kind of like the idea of the session, or like the thing that I'm trying to do today, is that I'm trying to kind of like initiate those little conversation and ideas anytime.
I just wanted to say, when you said people often say to an artist, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body, and then I'll say, well, look at your garden, or I think people sort of box in what art is, what is in their head, and yet it encompasses so much more than just making books or doing paintings or whatever.
Yeah, it's like cooking. If you cook a lot, I think that's pretty good. It's better than just like ordering food in every time. It's like, well, a lot of the time, it's sort of, okay, here's my idea. Growing up, like if your parents tell you that your thing aren't good enough, you kind of like stop doing that, and you're kind of like doubting yourself when you make other things. Not saying that happened to me, but I do like struggle with that quite a bit, where like self-doubt will kind of like stop you from doing certain things, and then like when you don't do it, it's sort of like you don't know what you miss out on, and it could be like it could be like an opportunity for something like much greater than you would have thought. I wouldn't have, why would I have to go down the rabbit hole of making like marble paper? But I did, and it's turned out to be like, oh yeah, you learn something about like a little bit of like that art historically, and then you kind of make these items that serve like a purpose for for like other things that you make.
I feel like for those of us that choose to have an art practice per se, that it's urge isn't a strong enough word. That compulsion is the word I always think of, because all the way along the way there's all kinds of reasons to stop. There's rejection, there's criticism, and it's an endless sort of barrage of that as you're working through your practice. And if you don't stop, it's because there's a compulsion here to continue to make. And that's what I think sort of makes an artist that's going to have a long practice, is that compulsion.
Yeah.
Do you see a distinction, or do you think it's important to have a distinction between like art that you like love versus art that you think is like really excellent, or let's say like really, I don't know, close to perfection?
It's a fine line. Where's Emily? Remember that video you sent me yesterday about the Ariana? It's just like, okay, so this person, I posted this video of like a different like snapshot of their art of Ariana Grande, and it looks like caricature, and it's not even like an actual caricature. It's just look like a kindergarten drew it. And I was like, this is like the most hilarious thing I've seen, because it looks so, it looks unintentionally bad that it could turn out to be kind of sort of like a postmodern thing. Because like we're at the point, we're at the point where it's sort of like, oh my God, like where you're exposed to so many things to the point where you kind of like, when something like grows on you, it became your own perception. It became your own like preference. So I would look at George Condo works, like a lot of like Kanye cover art on his album. So Kanye West get George Condo to do his album art, and it's like a bunch of like expressionist portraiture. So a lot of it is sort of like very like skew and like exaggerated, like facial feature. And I thought this is great. Like this is, it has its own uniqueness to it. It has its own like personalized style to it that I think it deserves to be its own, perfection. Because, like anything we learn from art school is that movement came about to decentralize the art, the art thing, the thing that used to be like fine art. It deconstructed that. So we already moved out of it. So anything that you think that could reach like a certain limit of being like excellent, it could be. Because like at the end of the day, any like any like art movement can have like a backer follower. That you have like hundreds and thousands of followers thinking that, oh, your art is good. Like, isn't that just success? Because like back in the day, like how many people actually like support Leonardo da Vinci? Like he's just like a really brilliant person who has a patron, and then all he does all his life are just painting, researching, making things, learning about things, like sketching, and then like not after like he he was not there anymore. Like these things keep on going, like, and they're going for so long. It's because a lot of people appreciate those creations. They appreciate like the knowledge, like the perception, and the thing between those two, knowledge and perception, it boils down to like the rationalization of your creation. So like you have all these like anatomy knowledge, but if it's just knowledge in your head and you don't filter it down out into like visual work, and you show people and then you tell them like this and this and that, and that's how it works, how would people would have understood what it is? Anatomy makes sense because like we drew like images of organs, and people look at it and they know these things that are inside their body, they understand their body. Isn't that just like the magnificent thing about creation, is that you kind of like you take these things and you combine them, and then you kind of like have like a new thing, and then like people understood those things, and that's your excellence. And it's, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Anything else? Go ahead. It will be like in the next couple ones. Yes, so we'll get there. Curiosity, yes, wholeheartedly. That's where like the rabbit hole comes in. Like when something like when it clicks to you, like let's say you go through your whole life and you kind of like know these things, but then they never pose any interest to you. But then at some point they become that thing that you're interested in. What caused that? I think curiosity has to happen at a certain time where it makes sense, and then it will drive that little walkway. and you kind of like keep moving in, and then you kind of like learn about all the new things that you wouldn't have learned about them if you hadn't, decided that you're gonna go into it. Having curiosity is fine, but I think it has to make sense to you. It has to like make sense to kind of like do these things, because if you don't like art, but you keep making art because you think it's gonna like serve certain purpose. Probably not the greatest idea, but nobody's gonna stop you. Like you're gonna do whatever you want to do anyway. Yeah, that's like my thought on curiosity. But I'm always curious, like there'll be the next couple one where it'll be like very interesting. Do we have one more? We can move on to. Yeah, okay. Very very late 2020s identity. Like what is it? Everybody's all about it. Everybody all about identity, Like what are you? Like everybody's trying to like, Gen Z, they categorize you the first thing they see about you. If you dress like a dad, they'll call you dadcore. But on a more serious thing, what is identity? Like everybody has an identity. I am an artist. Sometimes I don't like calling myself that, but I should. I am a maker, and I'm a creative person. I'm also a gay person. So all of that makes who I am. Sometimes in like a modern social media, those things get boiled down into like a single thing that each person like curates to the point where it seems like a product. It's obviously like a product, right? Everybody do it because like they want to sell certain thing. Like when you want to sell your personal image, you kind of have to boil it down to something. And that's like one thing that I'm struggling the most is that are you like an artist? Do you do like an Instagram like fashion thing? Do you do like an artisanal thing that you make and sell? It's sort of like a very like distinct thoughts where when you trying to kind of like when I try to kind of like think about them all as a whole, it's a little bit harder. But it shouldn't be like that. It should just be like, you're all these things. And like everybody should see you that way. Like you shouldn't be boiled down into just one thing. The art themselves is, again, they're conceptual art. It sounds pretentious. It is a sort of like amount like a mixture of thoughts when I paint, when I make like a certain image. It could just like the time when you kind of play with art. When I play with art is when I kind of like takes in, and then you just like you bounce back right away. You kind of make things quickly. But a lot of the art that I like, the art that I make that I like, tends to be a little bit more. They're a little bit more contextualized. The first one is a chalk pastel I did in maybe like second year into art program. And the one on the right is the last one from the exhibition, from the graduating exhibition. And it's sort of like, it's hard to see the connection, but that's the interesting part. It's like, what is the connection? For me, I think it does have a lot of importance in the way that I see myself, like the way I see my body, and the way I see myself in like a more another context. So that's like a lot of the work that I make. so that each painting they'll kind of have like a little story in them. They won't be something that you kind of like picks out right away. Like when we look at like Renaissance art, so we're looking at oil, traditional like master paintings. When people do like, allegory painting, like there's a lot of things to see, but those things sometimes they're very, what's the word? They're very literal. So you kind of like pick it up right away. But the fun things is to not let people pick it up right away. The fun thing is to kind of like not even yourself knowing what it is. That's why I make those things. It's like, it's sort of like more fun. It's more like exciting to make something that you're not sure. And then, that's why like learning about something new and enjoying the process is much better than kind of like repeating making like the products. Because like after that, like the aura of the original like idea, the excitement is sort of gone. You already like experience it. So it's like, for some people, they re-experiencing like those things when they keep making these things. But for me, it's like when I'm past an idea, it's sort of like, oh, why would I have to like go back and making the same thing? Move on to the next. So a lot of the painting that I really like are the one-off, because sometimes I do go back to kind of recreate the same thing. Sometimes it works out, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't have that same touch of uniqueness anymore, and then it becomes stale. So whenever because I have tried to recreate the first painting, like the same technique with some like a different pose, it didn't work out. It didn't have the same. I didn't have the same drive or like the same interest in it, because there's just too much of the same thing there, that when I redoing them, it's sort of like, oh, that's kind of like, it's a little bit boring now. Like what should I do that's like different or like better or like much interesting? So that's why they're always like a constant back and forth and jumping between different media, different inspirations, different like ideology, different like subject matters. So that's why it's always kind of like move past the point, and trying to circling back is a little bit tough, because I sort of have to like understood the reason why you do it in the first place. And sometimes like it's hard to do that, because as a person, as a human being, I think like when you go through experiences, you learn something from it and you move on, right? I don't know, for me myself, when I learn like certain things, when I pass like a certain point, I don't like to go back to it, because certain things that I use, when you're in like when you're in like a space where one thing that didn't make sense for me, certain things don't make sense, and I'm past that point, it's sort of hard to like go back and kind of look at everything as a whole to learn like if there's like more things that you should take from it. It's like a thing that I have to struggle and learn to do, and that's why like it's almost easier to just kind of like hop on to the next thing, like the next creative things. But then like, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
How do you become a master if you're consistently going to the same thing?
I think that's up to you. I think that's your perception, like how much is good enough. Yeah, so like sometimes I do like a lot of the things, right? And then it's like, oh yeah, it's good enough. And then I move on. So that's sort of like, that's when I know when to stop. But with the I shouldn't have to say like just hop on to the next thing. I do like take on like certain things that I learn, and then you apply it to different things, right? So I learned how to do like really refine, like realistic through like chalk pastel first, and then I move on to oil paint, and then I move on to like oil pastel, and that's sort of like that's how it weaves itself into it. It's like the technique is similar, but the medium there like offer like a newness to it. Curiosity. This is newer. This is a lot more newer, like the more recent. I went down the kink rabbit hole. Pop play is like a thing people do. It can be like sexual, it can be non-sexual if you choose to do it. People who participate in it sort of like you get mild to wild, right? People will like turn into a dog and do dog things in order to kind of escape. It's like it's like play. It's like playing games. It's like escapism. You remove yourself out of that space, and just kind of like de-stress or like certain things like that. So that was interesting to me, that people, we perform, but when we don't perform, like what's there? So that's sort of like, that's the kink itself is like, it's like a signifier for the idea of performance. Is that, do you, like you perform, right? Like everybody performs. So what's after, performing? What's left of it? Like who you are exactly deep down underneath. You probably have seen like a few of this variation in the watercolor books. I call him Henry Emilio. It's sort of like, it's like my own projection. It's like my own projection into that space, into that kink space. Because with a lot of the gay community, there's a lot of like subspace, and there's a lot of subgroup where everybody has their own thing. So when like the kink play, like the pop play to me, is really interesting because like it uses images of like the dog, which is to in a more like holistic society, like dogs, people love dogs. They're like the creature of loyalty. Like it sort of it does represent like loyalty in a lot of like different cultures. So to me, I think it's just interesting to see to kind of like put myself in a place where you observe those things, but you're not like part of it. And then that's why Henry Emilio came about. Like he has like the pup hood, but he's also like an imposter in a way. And that's just like my own kind of like my own little charade. Just kind of like to explore that space a little bit. The idea behind it too is that, actually, let's move on to, okay, let's move on to this one a little bit. So the ambassadors are, if dogs evolve just like humans, if they have evolved to the point, primates, they're canine. What if they evolve exactly just how we did? They have their own society. They have their own, little hierarchy. They have their own little like mannerism. They have their own like everything you can think of. Juxtapose that with us. We juxtapose that together. I want to see how they interact, like how they fit together in one setting. And it's sort of like it's sort of like hinting on playing with injecting yourself into like a subgroup that you initially don't belong to. Like say like if you don't look like them, if you don't really have the same interests, but you want to kind of like research on certain things or like experience certain things, or to like learn like certain people, like like learning other people's culture, you kind of have to assimilate. You kind of have to like take on like a different. You have to take on like a different charade. You kind of have to like put on like a different costume. So this is where it sort of comes about. The technique itself, like I just use like reference of like Dobermans and like certain dogs, and I kind of like extend their limbs a little bit, and I'll make them like stand upright, but then I'll just kind of like tweaks their limbs so that it looks like a hybrid. It looks like an like an evolution of your own of like canine limbs. So like there's more work later on that has that. Like unfortunately I don't have the image in this presentation. But if you like on the right, so a lot of like the legs look like this. They'll have like a spring back because that's how dogs' legs work. And a lot of like the conceptual idea, a lot of like the technique of placing like gesture, like posture to do figurative is still there. Say like this one on the right, the idea is just to kind of make like a confrontational feeling of the painting. And that's sort of like the end goal, is that you have a figure facing away, one of them looking at that one, and the other one is kind of like in between. And that's sort of like the idea of the painting, the thing that I kind of like want to like portray. So it starts very simple, but like with more like refined detail, it sort of falls down to how do like other viewer interpret the painting. The tensions, yes.
The colors alone are very
Yeah.
aggressive.
Yeah, so a lot of it, like the orange yellow has that. It's for it does have like an atmospheric, like a desert atmosphere. A lot of the figure themselves are cooler color. Yeah, so there is like a lot of contrast.
And there's something else to look at, like in the background.
Yeah.
Transfix of the figures.
Yeah, and then it's sort of like
You're in the middle of something. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because the one is looking directly at the figure, which is looking away, which is has its head up and clear, like not in a good space.
Yeah.
But the third one is my favorite because it looks to be looking at the audience, which I like. So it puts me automatically into the painting itself. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like I've stepped into an argument.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I call it imposter. It's sort of like back to the other like first idea was that, like it's injecting like a different character into like a space and kind of like have the narrative play itself out. It's sort of like you have a big story and you just have a snapshot of it right here, and you present it to other people and see what they can think of it. The narrative is there, but I'm not trying to tell like a whole story, so that there's no beginning, there's no end, and it's just like a little snapshot right there. Like, or maybe they just like, he's supposed to do something and then he didn't, and then something happened, that causes like confrontation between the two groups. So that's like the idea behind a lot of the painting, is that just a tiny bit of a snapshot. Back to the ambassador, is that the one on the right is like their minions. The other one like does like other stuff, and then the other two is kind of like there to kind of like doing the talking. It's sort of like that. It's like it's just a snapshot. It's just like a snapshot to tell you, like part of the story.
I think it also allows the viewer to bring their own story to it.
Yeah.
Like you provide the snapshot, and if I don't know the rest of the story, I'm going to bring my own, which
Yeah.
makes me more engaged with the painting.
Yeah, and usually often that's harder for a viewer to do because a lot of the time we look at painting really quickly, but the only art, like a lot of the art that stood out, that stuck a longer, like stuck with you for a longer period, or the one that you kind of have to kind of like sit and look and kind of like interpret. And that's sort of like the goal is to, like my goal is to, like compose images, enough that it just tell a little bit of it, and then like other people have to do the work. Cause like that's more like it's just more inviting that way, that you kind of have viewer look at art and just have like a story. A lot of George Condo, like the very visceral work, is sort of like that. It's sort of like it translates a lot of strong emotion, and it's also like like it's a very unique imagery, and that's where I drawn like inspiration from. It's just like putting like weird images, putting like out of the ordinary, like figures, and just kind of have kind of have like a story goes.
What are you exploring about masculinity in this work?
It has to do with like a hierarchy. Much like to a dog pack, they have hierarchy. So whichever the alpha has more power over the other ones, it's sort of portray its own like its own like masculinity in its way. But it also in a group of like dogs, the one that has the power are usually alpha male, but usually like sometimes the smart one will have that power. So it's like you kind of have to look at the leader portrayal of itself to kind of learn about like how they themselves view masculinity. So it's sort of I think that's all I have to say on that. It's still like a very it is like a really, it's really hard space for me to get to, because like for me it's also like different. It's also different for me because like I don't experience masculinity the same way a lot of people do. I know a lot of people, like a lot of gay men struggle with masculinity certain way, which I do, but I also experience that own space differently. So like in a gay community, right? There is a hierarchy, but I don't know about that hierarchy because I'm always the outsider. Like trying to date people here being Asian and looking the way I do, it's sort of like it's like an exclusive club where I'm not invited to. So like sometimes I have friends, right? I have friends where they'll tell me certain story that happened to them that I would never think of because it never happened to me. It's sort of like that thing where you're like the outsider, and then you don't really experience this like wholeheartedly what it is, and then like the only knowledge you have is through other through other people who have experiences. So you have like you build your own perception through a filter lens, because you don't experience it like directly. So that's like a thing about masculinity, is that when I portray them, it's through a filter lens. That's how I view masculinity. But that's why Henry Emilio came in, because yeah, so it's sort of like you have to fake it. Like like he has to fake it. It's sort of like that. Yeah, it's sort of like it's like a performance. It's like you put it on so that you kind of like experience the thing that you don't experience being like your authentic self. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'll just say one last thing. I'm really drawn to the figures of the, I don't know if it's father son or
Yeah.
child.
Yeah, and
That's such an interesting.
okay, so this one, right?
Yeah.
That's me and my grandpa.
Wow.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, I look at it. Yeah, I have like a photo of him. And, and then I was like, oh, interesting. Like, it has that thing. There's a hierarchy. There's this thing called homosociality, where men can experience, when men can have connection with other men without being oh, that's weird. That sounds weird. It's like going to the gym. It's like a bunch of guys going to the gym. But imagine this is where I grew up in. Imagine where there's no hostility. It's sort of like that. Because like back home, growing up, going to school, is that homophobia is there, but it's not bad. It's like like my friends accepted me for who I am. It's more or less like the parents that don't. Like I was lucky because, like I went to school with like friends who expressed themselves like flamboyantly, and that was normal. And then to me, like not until like later on in life that when I came out to my parents, that I started kind of like accepting part of that, like learning about part of that about myself, and then kind of like like take on like thing that speaks to me, that like appreciate things that people do and emulating that same thing because I want that for myself and for other people. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's sort of, yeah.
So you said back home, where is?
Oh, Vietnam. I grew up in Vietnam and I moved here when I'm, yeah. Yeah, I definitely would not know what it's like growing up here. Like that's just like the one thing that always interested to me is that I learn about Western world through movies, right? I watch movies and that's all I know about Western world is that through like cinema. So a lot of the thing that I find funny, that's a lot of like comedy jokes that funny that hit like edging on like discriminations is funny to me. But when I get here, when I learn about like, oh yeah, that's actually not funny, I'm like, oh, interesting, like good to know, because I wouldn't have that like censorship because I didn't know, because I didn't grow up here. But like all I've learned is that, or I've learned about like the world before I moved here is that it was like sort of different. It's like a version of itself, but it's not actually real. What was the question? I think like I went on like a different like route.
I just asked about that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, oh right. Cause yeah, cause like so like when it comes to masculinity, there's never like a hyper masculinity. There was never like a sort of like alpha male toxicity in my community where I grew up. There is a lot of like fighting, like school kids fighting, but it was never like crimes on like homophobic crimes. In a sense, that there is some, but it wasn't like a huge problem that we have. Unlike, learning about gay history here, like that's totally different door. It all totally opened a different door. But it also, again, like it's like an outsider view. So I never would know what it's like, but I have like like a picture in mind of what it is, and just like the way you learn how to kind of like be sensitive about it, or like be aware of it. Yeah.
So growing up in Vietnam, do people have dogs in the same way that they have in North America?
Yeah.
Do people have like these kind of Dobermans as pets?
Oh yeah. No. So definitely not. Having pet is a luxury for us back then. Seeing people who have pets that treat their pets nicely, that's like a bougie rich person thing. Like it's like extremely obnoxious to see that. But when I come here and when we see people like treat pets like certain way, I'm like, whoa, this is how it should be. Because dogs and cats back home, they're treated so poorly that it became like the norm. Like when we were growing up, my parents found a box like a litter of cats in our attic because like the mom like laid the baby there, and the mom was nowhere to be found. So they just asked like neighbor to kind of, like we're like a close knit community in like back home. So like we'll ask like the neighbor to like take the kitten away, and like at maybe like 10 I was like, that is so mean. Like where is he taking them? And like in my mind, they would never tell me what's gonna happen, but like in my mind, I know I'm like, yeah, they're gonna like dump them out in like a trash field somewhere. So that's sort of like what it was like having pets. So it's sort of like people keep dogs for safety. Like dogs will, like they'll be like your guard, but they treat the animals like, like I don't know, like really poorly, I would say. Like there is no that's like considerate manners towards your pets as people here in North America. Yeah.
So if you didn't have any experience of pets being treated well in Vietnam and then came here, so what prompted you to go with the route of the dog?
Yeah. Interesting.
Like,
I don't think I've ever thought about that.
I think like what you mentioned was like Dobermans are usually seen as a very masculine, alpha minded creatures.
Yeah. And so a lot of dogs have the way that dogs look, they have their own certain traits that people like. To me, Doberman and Rottweilers, they look really masculine. To me, they look really masculine. Like we shouldn't say that about dogs, but to me, they offer Doberman posture because they don't have a lot of hair and their tail's really short. They look very utilitarian, or like they look very they serve a certain purpose. They look like they're about to like do something. It's sort of kind of like military, like army people. Back to like the outsider idea is that's just how I see myself all the time. Like I would experience things very filter. Like when people say things to me, then in my mind, I would overanalyze sometimes. Or like, like when I go outside, I have like a really like strong view of myself, like my own perception. Like, oh, great, like glitter. And then I was just thinking like, oh, I wonder what other people think. Because then like my partner, he said like, I was talking to him today, and it was like, oh my god, I'm so nervous. And he said, you dress like that, and you worry about what people think when you tell them about your art. And I was like, wow, go to work then. But it's sort of like that, where it's sort of like, I have, being the outsider is a benefit because people don't really know who you are. You know, you sort of like, you don't fit in. So why fit in when you can just be whatever you want? So that's sort of like on a more like personal note. It's just how I kind of like view the world around me, and then how I kind of like, tweak myself for other people to see me. Like I wouldn't, like dress up like this every day. I would go to work like wearing something else, but it would just be like a toned down version of it. Yes.
So the way you might dress or present like glitter and whatnot, is that more of a facade or more of a true representation?
It's definitely a true representation. It's sort of like it's like the realest thing that I can do. It's just that this is really corny, but I watch Euphoria, and Jules on the show, she's a trans girl, but when they present her, they just said, oh, this girl just moved to town. And at the end of the show, there was this episode where they kind of like talk about her experience being a trans woman, for like from male to female. And a lot of the things she said somehow resonates so much with who I am. And it has a lot to do with like, being feminine, and like kind of like picking between femininity and masculinity and see where you fit in. To me, like I falls in the middle. I falls in the middle where I don't like gender bending, but I also like appreciate that that gender bending is there. A lot of the thing like I do like things a lot to like long history of pride, where and then like now more than ever, I think like people are more like younger people are more accepting towards like expressing yourself a little bit more feminine. Like men will express themselves more feminine, and vice versa, like women will do the same thing, expressing themselves like more masculine. And then like people are falling into this like middle ground where you don't have like an like a normalized male female characteristic. You just fall in between. And I think like that's where I am. And like I would love to like emulate that for other people. Like wearing glitter. It's like it's fun. It's like it's easy. But when people see it, they'll be like, wow, cool. Like really? Like glitter? I don't think so. Glitter is cheap.
Like knowing you personally and then seeing your art and your creation of your art.
Yeah.
You talk about being an outsider a lot, which is like
Yeah.
your experience 2020. And then when you go back to like the other one, which is Emilio, he's almost like, okay, I've accepted I'm an outsider, but I can know what I want to be with who I am as the mask. It's not like a facade, because Emilio is looks very cohesive and confident.
Yeah.
And it's just a new way of like representing yourself instead of trying to be something else.
Yeah, it's sort of like you have to go through a lot of like experiences. You have to kind of like see the world a certain way in order to kind of like decide, like come to a point to decide how you want to be seen. Yeah. Sort of, yeah, it's like definitely like coming into like accepting like the way you look, accepting like the way you express yourself. Should we take a break? We're at 6? Oh, we're at 6, or okay. Okay. A lot of the big texts are just on the reading material. But it's like a lot of those things do like overlap with like what's come after like these other two prompts, other two topics. So there I have like a process of the work that I make about time. In a very generalized way, I think about images that were created like during the ancient time, say like Greek and Roman sculpture and bust, the Renaissance like painting, about like how they represent like the human body and like how beauties are viewed. I sort of like take those ideas and I kind of like bring them forward a little bit, where I would take images of, oh, this is so bright. I would take images of like someone from our time, and I kind of like make them into like broken busts. And then it's sort of like the idea of like relics. So what happened when we becomes the relics? Like what happens when other people from the future see us, how like in a certain way, as how we see Greek and Roman busts, how we see Greek and Roman civilization through the thing that they make. It's sort of like this shift between like taking like a huge period of time and then moving it forward, and just kind of have like an experiment where like what would us be seen as in the same way that we see like older civilization, and in a whole like how we see the human figure in the art presentation, and in real life, and how those two kind of like overlap, and how different they are or similar they are. Yeah, so a lot of like these one, they kind of like hinting on that. It's just like like cast of feet, but it I made them so they kind of look like shoes. And then the last one is memory. So a lot of the thing I talked about, like the snapshot of a certain thing. So the idea of the memory is that when we remember things, we don't remember them as a whole, but we just remember like snapshot of certain things. So sometimes people like remember things. That's why we have nostalgia, is that you remember certain thing and you think they were like really good, but it's probably just the same as how we are now. So like, does memory truly represent like what to remember, or are they just kind of like like another product in your mind that you made up to kind of like curate like your life as a whole?
I think memories are actually made up, because they're based on the perspective.
And also like sometimes memories are made of what people told you. So like sometimes parents will tell you like, oh yeah, like at like 8 you hit your head, but it's like you don't remember that. It's like I say I remember vividly, I was at a park, there was like a huge pond, there was railing, and I was sitting on the railing, and I remember topple over, and my dad was like 5 feet away, but then he caught me, and I was like, did it actually happen? Yeah, it's sort of like that. It's sort of like it plays with like time too. So like a lot of like the broken images, like relics, they kind of represent like like the relics represent like memories, but it also like it's like a version that were made to signify that event. So it's sort of like it has like an era of that real thing, but it also like filtered out.
Well, memories and sentiment go hand in hand too, right?
Yeah.
Sentimentality, like two people can share a similar memory or a similar situation, but
Yeah.
they're completely different.
Completely different. Yeah,
Even though they
exactly.
were both in that moment at the exact same time.
Yeah, and then you say like, I don't think you remember it correctly. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing. It's like a memory like real, or are they just kind of like a fiction of your mind? But I think it's it's sit in between. It's like you will build like like images around it, and you believe that is to be true. But it does like have something to do with like what you actually experience.
You're probably familiar with the, I guess you call it like a prologue to that Gaga video. I think it's like Marry the Night, Born This Way.
Okay, yeah.
The nurse scene, the hospital scene.
Yeah. It's actually, yeah, and it's actually like her like experiencing like car crash. Oh, is that the one?
Well, it's the one where she talks about the videos of
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the hospital, but she says like,
Yeah.
this is not how it actually was. Right?
Yeah, like
They actually vomit and-
the nurses are like dressing in design dresses.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you see Calvin Klein, right?
Yeah.
The idea that it's not a true representation of what happened, but in some ways it's more true because it's her version
Yeah.
of it as an artist, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of.
Yeah.
Is there something you're worried about remembering correctly?
I don't think so. I do like worry on like, being who I am because of certain thing that happened to you in the past. You build a mechanism to kind of like counter those things, right? But then like sometimes those mechanisms aren't necessarily the best thing that you should do. So you kind of have to kind of like learn how to like deal with things differently. Yeah.
Memory is kind of a physical thing too. Memories sit in the body, like unconsciously.
Yeah.
And over a lifetime, you build memories that sit in the body, which is where you get generational trauma from, because
Yeah.
those memories unconsciously can pass on to the next generation because they actually sit in the cells of the body.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
memory is huge.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. This was from a group show in 2019 over in Sky App. But I have like, this is sort of like an ongoing thing, like playing with masculinity and like like seeing like men like through like a filter. Is that I made this thing called Private Bungalow. It's like it's like a vacation. It's like for men. It's like for gay men going on a vacation. But sometimes like they will go to like these certain spots where you meet other gay men. And it's sort of like special that way. Whereas like now it's like this gay cruise and it's kind of not the vibe. But it's like going to like a certain spots, have like I don't know if you guys know this movie, it's called Stranger by the Lake. It's sort of like that. It's sort of like a thriller. It's like a horror thriller. But it's like it has that excitement in like every gay man. There's like this thing. It's like you're excited to go to those things because like something's gonna be there. But it's like this thing. It's like I would say it's a very like common thing that a lot of gay men share, or like some of the gay men share. It's like a joint. It's like a collective experience where you can kind of relate. But then for me, it's like different, right? Because I am also the outsider, and then I don't really like fit into those space, being Asian. So I'll, like I look at them, and I portray them in a certain way. That's kind of like drawn out like the beauty from it, but it also like, it's through a lens. like it's my own like perception of it. Yeah. Yes.
So like you're talking about like the outsider and how you kind of like don't feel like you always have like this masculine energy. And like when I look at your work, I kind of like feel like a voyeur. So do you feel like when you're making this kind of spaces, is it like a voyeuristic space?
Oh, totally. It's sort of like this is like this is like it is like it's just like a thing for me to kind of like express out, because like a lot of the time it's like I don't get to view certain things because I'm certain type of people, so I'll make these images where I think it will look like that based on like like the description from like other people. That's why like a lot of like gay movies is like it's so romanticized to a point where it's not even real for the the people that it's portraying. I don't know if everyone knows Bruce Gummy. He used to live. He owned the Trading Post. The Trading Post, like he sold the Trading Post, and maybe like in 4 or 5 years ago. But I met Bruce, and we sort of like have a lot of common ideas about art, lives and things. So a lot of the experience, a lot of like exploration in art is thanks to Bruce, because a lot of the feedback he gave me, like really shaped the way I make art now. And it's sort of like, it's like a thing to, like the pride, like gay activists to like to have like that space to be able to kind of like have that, like sexual freedom, like identity freedom to kind of like really explore those things. Yeah, I would love, like, he's in Argentina, but I would love to like thank Bruce. And thank you everyone to be here today. It was lovely to see everyone. And if you have any, like just think about these prompts, do whatever you like with it. You can send feedback back to the biofeedback email, and then I'm pretty sure they'll just forward them to me.